So a really common thing you're going to put on a GUI is a button. They're very easy to implement, similar to the label, except they do things. Okay, so we'll have, in the next example, we're going to have two widgets, a button and a label. Obviously, if you're going to put these two things on this grid, they've got to have different locations, otherwise one will appear on top of the other and then you can't see the first one. And also, there's a variant, it's commented out, but you can uncomment it. There's a variant for setting the foreground and background colors of the button. So you can change things like color and, as we've seen, font. Currently, when we first put it on, the button will do nothing when it's clicked. So here's the code for that. You can see there's the window geometry as normal. Then we create this button. So we tell it it's going to be part of the window, and the button text is going to say click me, and then it's going to go in column 1 of row 0. And the label is going to go in column 2 of row 0. So you'll notice there's no column 0. So that, when we run it, actually shrinks to have 0 width. We will put something in that column in a minute, but at the moment there's nothing in column 0. So it shrinks to have 0 width. And that's all there is to it. You can also see this bit of code commented out where I can set the background color of the button to orange and the foreground color to red, which would be a very odd color scheme, but you can decide on your color scheme accordingly. Okay, having a button that does nothing is a bit pointless, so let's have a button that does something. And what we do in order to do that is to provide a function that will interact with other parts of the GUI. This is not just a Python thing. This is true for most programming languages, where whenever you have a button or any other GUI element that's supposed to be responsive, you have to provide a function that will do something when the button is pressed, and then you tell the GUI, when this button is pressed, use this function. Okay, so in the next example, the function is just going to change the text on the label. Functions like this are known as callback functions because the library code, the TK-int code that creates the button and implements it, uses that function that we've given it to call back into our code. So there's a kind of interaction between our code and the library. So we tell it, when this button is pressed, call this function, and then it comes back to our code and calls the function. Okay, so here's the code for that. So you'll see, in fact, the only difference, apart from the fact I've deleted that line which changed the colors, the only difference in terms of the elements we're putting on the GUI are that I've put this command equals clicked there. Okay, yeah, there it is. So, and this is telling the TK-inter that when the button is clicked, it should call this function called clicked. And what does the function called click do? Well, all it does is it sets the text on the label to say the button was clicked. So when we run it, if we click the button, then the text on the label changes to button was clicked, and that's done by our function. So we can decide what happens when a button is pressed. We just have to tell it the name of the function that does that. We tell TK-enter the name of the function that handles that button. And we can have lots of functions handling different button presses or handling button presses in different ways. So we tell it, in this case, when that button is pressed, then change the text on the label to say the button was clicked. Okay, I'm going to finish the video there, and then we'll move on to look at some other elements.